So, Bradwell Windmill with Richard Wilde, who's one of the volunteers at Milton Keynes Museum. Hello.
Good morning to you. Glad to see you here.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the place?
Well, the mill was built round about 1803 by Samuel Holman, who was a miller. And though it ground flour for the local area, the majority of the flour went down to London because one of the reasons for the mill being here is what was then called the Grand Junction Canal. So the flour was loaded because London in those days with its population was growing overnight. They couldn't keep up with food and what have you, so a lot of it went down to London. And this mill is a tower mill. In other words, it's a brick tower mill. And the reason I emphasise it's a tower mill for flour is because a lot of mills around the country, whether they be windmills, water mills, were used for a whole host of different functions. Some were used for grinding stone for clay, sawmills, even oil from rapeseed, etc. So that's why I always emphasise it's a flour mill.
So we're right by the canals. You mentioned what we now call the Grand Union was the Grand Junction Canal. And so that's the fastest way to London, or at least most reliable way to London. And so what would this area have been like, which is now a new city?
Well, when this mill was built, Samuel Holman bought an acre of land, which would have been outside, no shrubbery. It would have been open fields. And that was the whole idea of the mill. It was functional from a wind point of view. Nowadays, we because of the shrubberies all grown up as a new city, we rely on an electric motor turning the stones. So it's consistent.
And how long was this in use?
Well, as I said, it was built around about 1803, 1804, and it ceased functioning in 1876. It was a short-lived mill, but that was really one of the many reasons is this was left in time. It wasn't altered. A lot of the mills around the country took on, because we're in the middle of Industrial Revolution then, steam power. This one didn't, and that's why it is very much one of the only mills. It's very original, because it didn't have traction engines. And then the other reason, which was most probably more important, is flour and what have you started coming in from the States, and it was cheaper. So this, as I said, had a limited history.
So it was effectively mothballed in 1876 then? Then what happened to it?
Well, it had various sort of... The first things that were auctioned off were the stones, because as you only see those when you visit, but the stones were some of the most important parts of the mill. They were the first things to be auctioned. And then it was mothballed. It was owned by various in 1948, 49. Wolverton owned it. It was in decline. Sales were rotten, fell off. It was really only when the story of Milton Keynes started with the Development Corporation, they put some time and money into it and started to do a partial refurbishment of the mill. And that's where it starts from, really.
So as a result, when we visit now, we can see millstones and all the other paraphernalia.
Yeah. Most of it is original. There are a few beams that were, as I say, installed installed by the Development Corporation because the old beams were just too rotten. There's a lot of bits and pieces, and when you come into the mill, you've got to break it down into a little bit of sections. The history of the sails, for instance, the sails outside have a history really of their own. The millstones and the way the millstones are driven have a history as well. It's not just, it's a working building, but it can be broken down into different categories.
So when visitors come, if you're coming to walk past this, can you visit, can you come inside?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And see.
That's one of the reasons why we use an electric motor, because if we were reliant on wind power, which we could be, there is so much machinery moving, it's not quite the same as turning off a light switch. It takes a little time to stop. And of course, children and what have you, we encourage children to come in and look at things. And they're very interested in looking at things. And it's a safety aspect. Health and safety has to come first as well. So we have an electric motor driving the stone we use. So therefore, public can come in and watch. Otherwise, the public will just be outside looking at turning sails.
Sounds like a good compromise.
Well, let's go upstairs. Right, this is a 2-stone mill. Some mills have 3 sets of stones in. This has always had 2 sets of stones in. And we use a stone, just one set of stones, which are very functional. They're made up of a burr stone, which is a very hard stone. There's all sorts of different materials used in the makeup of stones. This is burr stone. It's a quartz stone, and it comes, or did come, from just outside Paris, from a quarry there. 2 stones, as I say, the bed stone is stationary, and it's the top stone that revolves and does the grinding. And when I say there's a history to stones and sails, because the stones are not just flat cut. They're very, very slightly curved. They have bits and pieces cut, so when the grain comes in, it's literally turned over a little bit before grinding. So the actual facing of the stone is specialist job, all on its own. Now, the miller, in actual fact, would work this whole mill from downstairs. Although this mill doesn't have a fantail, the cap, the top of the building, the wooden section you see the sails are attached to, can revolve 360 degrees. And there's a chain would hang down the back, and he would move the whole cap around and move the sails into the wind. This shaft here, which is a one tree trunk of elm.
So elm for the
elm.
these little pegs.
These teeth.
Yeah.
They're teeth. These are actually made from pear. You do get some are made from apple in different, but they were the common timbers used, pear and apple. So really, because they are very tough, straight grained, and you can see when visitors come, you can see the wear on them, and it'll be very easy just to take those out, replace them, and each tooth of this has a pin going through, which locates it, so nothing can fly out when they're revolving.
Yeah. So different woods for different purposes.
Yeah, basically yes. The sails are mainly made up of a softwood, a pine in actual fact. You get the beams here, which are elm, and the beams downstairs, I said the Development Corporation replaced, are actually oak.
So elm's not so common these days.
No, not at all, not at all. And you can imagine that piece of elm there, which is, as I say, is a tree trunk, you could just about put your arms around it. It's that in diameter. If this mill is 200 years old, imagine how old that would be. Yeah. Because when it came in, that most probably is another couple of 100 years growth there.
So the typical day for the miller when he's in operation?
Well, he would have been grading from all around. As I said, some would be ground for the local people who lived here. The rest would go by barge to London. He would also do some animal feed. Now, in the area, apart from the wheat and oats and what have you being grown, there was a bean grown, which was grown purely for animal feed. Now, that would have been crushed just slightly. And so he would have kept probably that wheel there for such things, because the wheel over here would be kept for human consumption, human food. And that, obviously, it's different prices. Be one price for doing wheat, and just for gently crushing animal feed, another price. But there's a lot of stories there about what millers got up to there around the country, and how they managed to save some of the flour in actual fact for themselves. Because here you have a box, which is, you either call it a vat, whatever, around the stones. And when it's cleaned out, because here is a crane, we lift the top stone and we clean and what have you. And when that's put back, it takes a little while for the ground flour to build up before it starts being sent downstairs to either shoot for packaging. And there's all sorts of stories that the miller's wife would, every time that somebody came with their grain, she would clean the box out. That would be her perk. So every time somebody came in with grain, there was never exactly the same amount of grain going out the door, because she had kept what was in that box, which every time takes a little time to build up.
It's a bit like a baker's dozen.
Yes, absolutely.
Or maybe a tithe. So this was in production 19th century, really slowed down.
19th century, yeah.
Really. And then obviously you mentioned that it became mothballed. Then because Milton Keynes built up as a city around this, or it's a new town around this, they've then taken on responsibility for repairing it, restoring it, and then teaching the public.
Well, let me just emphasise that, because in the early days, when the Milton Keynes Charter was first granted, which goes back to the late 60s, pictures of this mill actually featured on postcards, posters, and they were sent all over London and places to encourage people to come. Because the biggest story was that Milton Keynes, being a new town, had no history, which was totally wrong. We've got lots of listed buildings and what have you in Milton Keynes. So this was put on sort of postcards and pictures and what have you to say to people, yes, Milton Keynes, it's got history. And this was used. Since then, of course, after fulfilling its purpose for publicity, it did decline, as I said. And then really over the years, nobody has really known, I suppose it's true to say nobody's really known what to do with it. Yeah. But now, of course, there's a lot of interest in where your food comes from, especially with trying to educate school children and etc. So they like to come here to visit.
And you do some milling of grain still?
Yep, all the time. The last Sunday of every month and in the summer months, and we open for Hod's Days, with Heritage Open Days. The mill weekends, we're open all weekend. Although we're not licensed, we do the flour and we just give it to people for a donation and say, go and try our flour. It's organic, it's wholemeal, and it's you can't get better because it's straight off the stone. For various openings, we have people come from all over. There is definitely an interest with people who come, who rather like train spotting, come and look at mills all around the country.
Well, actually, maybe a train spotter might want to come here as well, because there's an old disused railway line.
The disused railway line used to bring the workers from Newport through New Bradwell, basically when the works was at the height.
This is the Wolverton works.
When it was the height of its production.
Yeah. So Wolverton was a railway site?
Yeah, it was a big railway site. Many people, I mean, there's the old story that come 4:30 when the whistle went off, if you didn't have any business in Wolverton, don't go there, because the workers used to stream out. And I suppose Swindon, was one of the other big railway sites. But certainly a lot of carriages and what have you were built there. And it was mainly a carriage works.
So Wolverton being part of Milton Keynes is something that was subsumed by Milton Keynes, but that's also the location or nearby location of the museum.
Oh yes, we must mention the museum. Now the museum in itself is a very good place to visit. It's a smallish museum, and it's run by volunteers as well. But unlike other museums, people are allowed to touch things, especially when children go in. There's the schoolrooms, the street of shops, the transport area, and of course, a few years ago, there were 2 new halls built, which show some of the history of Milton Keynes, ancient Milton Keynes. And as I said, the important thing is that people are allowed to touch items, whereas in other museums, sometimes you just got to look.
So actually, I've had a play on one of the organs. You've got an organ. Yes. You can pump with your feet and have a little tinkle on the ivories.
Yes, that's true. I was stressed because during the different seasons and what have you, there are slightly different times. But always check their website.
Well, that sounds like good advice. All right, thank you very much.